Hello there, and welcome to a guide to using the Creators Kit plugin. I'm Gnome, and today we're going to be walking through how to use the plugin, all its niches and nuances, and hopefully get you fairly acquainted with using it for your own creations. First of all, I don't need you here. Okay, so I created this plugin as part of the official sailing skill proposal for putting together the development blog videos, which you can find on the official Old School YouTube channel. So how do you use it? Two main places for information are going to be the side panel, Creators Kit side panel, as well as the config menu, which you can find in the general RuneLite configuration just by searching Creators Kit and opening up the config. So going back to our side panel, the basic function of this plugin is to add objects to your scene. So if I hit add object, it'll create a new object for me. It'll use the model ID that I input in here, which 7699 is the model ID for a crate. I'll get into how to get those in a second. It'll tell you the rotation, the radius, which don't worry for a little bit, and the animation, which is currently default -1 for no animation. So if I go back to our config, I can find in the scene section all the different controls for manipulating this object in the scene. So if I hit home, it'll automatically put the object in that location. If I hit end, it'll rotate it. See, that's counterclockwise. And if I hit delete, it'll rotate it clockwise. I can also hit insert to spawn and despawn. And again, location is home, which will bring the object to the tile that my cursor is pointing at. Okay, going back to our other basic controls, you can minimize these, especially when you have a lot of objects. It'll help clean things up. You can also, clearly delete it so that it no longer appears. Let's show you that quickly. There you go. You can and you can duplicate it to say take all the exact same options, all the exact same features, and make it into a new object of that type. You also notice that when I have multiple objects, the selected one is the one that the hotkeys work on. So if I have, let's just change this to, a double crate. And I apply some hotkeys like rotating, it'll apply to the selected object. If I change my selected object, there you go. One thing to note is I'll often click back in the canvas here, because sometimes if my target is over here, you have to click back in the canvas for the hotkeys to properly register. So if I'm changing this and I press home, it'll bring it to the home of the little rotation box here, not actually move the location of the object itself. It's just a good thing to note. That's why you'll probably see me right-clicking back in the canvas here every once in a while. Okay, so other features here. Yes, rotation. You can manually rotate, or you can rotate by 90 degrees by using the hotkeys. Radius is important for larger objects because sometimes they'll overlap with nearby tiles. I'll show you that in a second though. And other than that, what you can also do to get in a certain object is you can right-click different objects or NPCs and hit store. So let me just store this guard. And I will press custom to toggle to the custom mode. There you go. There's our guard. I have a little drop-down menu here of all the objects or NPCs that I've stored, and I can freely select between them. So let's say I right-click and select myself, store myself. Let's just rotate that guard to face us. And I select myself. There I am. You can also apply animations, as said before, which should bring us to our debug menu. So the debug menu by default, going to our config, is going to be page down. And this will show all the different objects that we have checked off here. So if I hit page down, there you go. Currently, I have the player, so you. I have NPCs, so NPCs. You can also do other players, I guess it's all folded under player. You can do game objects. So a game object would probably be like this standard right here. If I hit store on that, go back to our side panel and select the game object, there you go. It's our standard. So game object, there you go. You'll notice that this debug menu gives you the animation, the current animation, the pose animation, so the animation when the NPC or player is idle, and the ID. Now the ID can be handy for finding it, for finding the model ID. So this is the object ID, but the model itself, the 3D model, has a different ID associated with that object ID. What we can do with this is let's just bring us a couple of very nice websites that we can use. One is going to be RuneMonk. So we can search through RuneMonk to find NPCs and their animations or objects and their animations. Let's just find, what's an easy one? A Necrail? Let's go to our data here. Yeah, so the model ID, so the ID of the NPC is 8. We don't really worry about that. The model ID is 5074. So let's just take that and enter it into the ID here. There's a Necrail. Let me just close that debug menu, rotate him towards us. If I want to find an animation for him, I can also find his walking and standing animation or his pose animation. And we'll just take that and throw it in animation. There you go. That's his animation, that's his idle. Another good website to use is going to be the minimal OSRS item database. So here we can find objects, we can find NPCs. If I type in what's something fairly generic, banner, just because I have it on my mind, it'll bring up all the objects or NPCs with the name banner, and you can find their model IDs in this column. So let's say I really want this banner right here. Oh, let's not do that one. That one's two models together. We'll get there in a second. This one's a single model. Copy that and insert that into our model ID. And there you go. You'll notice that, right, the funny thing about animations, sometimes they work with other objects, sometimes they don't. But you might want this banner to be idle. So I'll just put that back to -1. There you go. So that's the very, very basics of spawning a model and animating it. This little system here is good for just getting a single model ID, which you can see any of these here would be. You notice that this in particular, these are parts of ships, right? And so we'll get to how to combine different models together in a second. But first, let's do something a little interesting. We're going to start programming. I'm going to take this guard, store him, and let's find him. There you go. Now, let's say I want him to walk around me. I want him to walk through this gate here. First off, I'm just going to open our debug menu, and let's just clean this up because I don't want all of these objects here. I don't want game objects, don't really want NPCs. I think that should be good. I do want object path for sure, because we are going to be programming a path for this object. Now, our programmer hotkeys are all down here. So what we can do is we can hit Control A to add a step. And you can see there's a little indicator to show that we've added a step right there. But that's really hard to see. So let's actually open up our programmer. I'm going to go back to our side panel. I'm going to hit Programmer. This is an interface to modify the program. So we can change the idle animation, which let's just change the name quickly just for clarity. Let's just make sure we're aware that this object is our guard. Open our programmer again. Let's set the idle animation. A good idle animation is this one right here, 808. There you go. Let's just move over to him. 808. An active animation, so this would be when the object or NPC is moving. what does their animation look like? An 819 is the basic walk animation. I think it's 819. I might be corrected in a second. The speed, you can do walk or run speed. We'll do walk speed, turn speed, so how fast they rotate. 68 is a good default. And movement type is, you can do normal for just walking on land. You do waterborne for walking on water, which is obviously useful when creating the sailing skill. And ghost for ignoring all barriers, like all walls. So we're going to leave it at normal, and we're just going to re-roll that color to make it a little more clear. Yeah, that's not too bad. Okay, let me just close that. So we added one step with using Control A. I'm going to go back to our config and look at the rest of our hotkeys. So let's just add a couple steps. As you can see, a line is being drawn between all the different steps for this NPC. And if I want to play this program, I can hit Control Space, and there you go. He walks through his course. He's currently using his active animation, as shown by him walking. That was 819 that we entered. And as soon as he stops, he'll go back into his idle, which is 808. There you go. Now I can also delete steps by Control D, so it'll just remove that step from the equation and recalculate where the guard should go. Let's remove this step, and I can hit Control R to reset his position. Control R, there you go. Control Space to play. Control Space to pause. Space to play. And Control R to reset. Now, you can also have multiple objects going at the same time. So let's say we were to duplicate this guard. As you can see, it also duplicated his path, so it overlaid it with another guard's path, which I'm going to hit Control C down here to clear. And I'm going to give him a new path. So Control A, Control A, Control A, Control A. Now, if I want to play these guards at the same time, I can use Play Pause All, which would be Control End. And there you go. Hit Control End again, and you can see that they pause. Control End. If I want to reset them, Control Home. That resets all of them. Okay, so that's programming in a nutshell. Let's move over to more complicated models. As you can see, a lot of models, including players or many NPCs, many objects, are composed not of one model, but of multiple models. So let me just delete what I have right here, and let's just start fresh. I'm just going to hit page down to remove my debug menu, and let's add an object, and let's open up our anvil. So this is the place where we can take multiple models and we can merge them together to create something new. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's just take two crates and add them together. 7699 is the model ID for a crate. 7699. And I'm going to offset one of these crates by one tile in the X direction, so in the east direction. And I will forge and set to mash these models together and make it an object that I can select in our menu here. So I didn't name it, so its name is name, but let me just put it down. See, two crates. If I rotate it, it'll rotate like so. Now's a good time to also talk about radius. Look what's happening here. Because the object takes more than one square, the radius has to be increased to accommodate the extra space. Radius essentially tells a model how much of the surrounding space it's allowed to overlap. So there you go. 67 is a nice medium where it should stop overlapping with nearby objects or nearby tiles. Okay, going back to our model anvil. So that's one of the things that we can do with our anvil. We can translate an object relative to its center. So again, I just increased the X direction by another for the second crate. And just to make it very clear which crate I'm manipulating, let's go into our color swapper and swap some of the colors. So the way RuneScape works with colors is it reuses a lot of the same models over and over again. And what it'll do, like if you think the basic wizard robe, you know there's a lot of different variants of that wizard robe that are just recolors. So it'll actually use the same model ID, but it'll change what colors are on the model. So let's just make it a very clear differentiation. Let's just change some random colors on the crate and see what happens. I'm going to close that. And I'm going to hit Forge and Set to apply it to the selected object. There you go. Let's just move it back for a second. Okay, there you go. The selected colors that we changed through this menu, this brown was changed to green, this brown was changed to green, this brown is changed to green, let's change that to yellow. Close that, Forge and Set, there you go. That exact color, all the polys with that exact color were recolored to yellow. So that's one of the cool things that we can do with these objects. Now again, back to our basic features. Let's just quickly run through what this is. So, right, basic controls. I can add a new object to mash with the other objects. I can delete the object. I can also duplicate the object so that there's another one in the scene. So if I hit duplicate and I translate it by, let's go, y is 1. There you go. Exact same features as the other object, just we've translated it in the y direction. So yeah, let's talk about translations a bit. So as you can see here, you have X translation, Y, and Z. So this is translate by full tile. Now this is relative to the size of the object. So as we scale the object up, that'll actually be more than one tile. But for basic object, translate by one tile in the X direction, so east to west, Y direction, north to south, Z direction, up and down. So let's translate the object we just spawned by one in the Y direction and one in the Z direction. And look where it lands. There you go. Now you'll notice that if I program this object, so let me just open our debug menu with page down, add a step there, add another step there. These are all treated as one single object, just multiple models mashed together. Okay, let me clear that, hit home to bring it back, page down, close our debug menu. Okay, let's get our setup back here. Okay, so that is translate by one full tile. You can also translate by subtile, so a tiny amount, so which is 1/128th of a tile. So let's translate by half a tile in the X direction, which would be, it's not 68, that's 64. Now just watch our crates up here. There you go. It just translated by another half a tile in the X direction. Yeah, so again, translate by full tile, translate by a subtile, 1/128th of a tile in the X, Y, Z direction. You can also scale an object up in the X, Y, or Z direction. So let's take our basic crate here, and let's scale this one up a bit. So 1/28 is a default scale, so if I go less than that, it'll scale down. Let's just show that quickly. 64, 64, 64. There you go. Now it is half the size of its regular self. I can also scale up. Let's do 256, 256. Let's not scale up in the Z direction, just to show you can scale in the different directions. So there you go. It is now a very wide but relatively flat box. And we can rotate it. So it's a little unclear when you have just a crate, but let's rotate it by 90 degrees. There you go. It's 90 degrees rotated relative to the other objects that we've merged together with it. So that is the basics of translating and scaling and rotating your objects in the anvil. I also showed you a bit of the color swapper. I should probably show you copying and pasting. So you can copy, you remember that we recolored this crate over here with the green and yellow. We can also copy those exact recolors and paste it to another object. Now something good to note here is that it'll only apply again on the exact same colors. So if I were to take this banner, and let's actually right click this banner and send it to the anvil. It's going to be a game object, so we'll send it to the anvil. There you go, it's added right here. Just for clarity, I'll call this banner. If I copy the colors that I recolored over here and paste it to the banner, it'll only repaste the exact same colors. So only if this brown, for example, is the exact same brown as one of these used to be, will it actually work. So if I hit forge and set, yeah, didn't recolor anything. I would have to go back and manually recolor the colors of the banner, which maybe I'll do right now. So let's say I want to add a red, exchange the blue for a red, I'll hit set. You can also copy and paste from this menu, it doesn't really matter. Close that, forge and set, there you go. Banner is now a bit more of a pink. We can also change the lighting. So actors like NPCs and players usually run off a bit of a different lighting system than objects do. It depends entirely on the object, to be honest, depends entirely on the NPC, but that's a general rule. You'll notice that this tree here, for example, this tree uses really harsh lighting. You can see it's really bright on this side and really quite dark on this side. So what I'm going to do, so I'm going to open up our anvil, I'm going to clear it, let's add a new object, and let's delete that object, we don't want that. I'm going to right click this tree and anvil, so send all the models of this object or NPC to the anvil. Gonna do that, open it up, this is our tree. So I'm just gonna name it tree, and I'm going to move back over here, close our wonderful disaster, and I'm going to hit forge and set to apply it to the selected selected object. As you can see, there it is. Now, this is using the relatively harsh lighting system. I'm going to change the lighting system to use something a little closer to an actor's lighting system. So again, hit forge and set, and that's a little bit softer, right? I can also use no lighting, which is a very niche situation where you'd probably want to use this, and it looks, well, it doesn't look lit. Now, something good to note here, before we just quickly move on to playing more with the anvil, first of all, let me just name this tree and hit forge and set again. As you can see, in this menu are all the different things that we have forged, along with the other objects or NPCs that we've stored. So sometimes that can get a little bit messy, especially when you're changing the anvil features a lot and you're continuously forging different models, changing all these different parameters. Often you'll probably want to clean up your little drop-down menu over here. So you can actually go to the organizer. It's a very simple menu. Just shows you the name of the object that you've forged or that you've stored from the environment and allows you to delete it. So I don't really need most of these anymore. Maybe let's try and keep our crate mess if it's still there. There we go. Let's keep that. Yeah, that's just cleaning up using the model organizer. Going back to our anvil, where were we? Just showed recolors. Yes, let's move on to something a little more complicated. So let's say I want to take this guard and send him to the anvil. So I'm going to anvil, and you can see NPCs and players are often composed of many models mashed together. So if I just take what I just took from the guard and forge and set him, and maybe take off the lighting, forge and set, you'll see I end up with a pretty average guard. That's great. If I remove or modify one of these, it'll modify only a small part because, again, a guard is a bunch of models like mashed together, like the chain body, the med helm, the face, the pants, the boots. All of those are different models. So I can modify one of them. I can modify each of them individually if I so choose. So let's just do a little color swap here. So this is probably the helm, just given the color scheme that's being used here. So let's say I want maybe a bit more of a rune helm on this guy. Let me approximate something that looks maybe rune-ish. Just going to unset the recolor that's there by default and set that to blue. Bit of a bright blue for rune, but that's okay. We'll leave it for now. We can also, again, let's say I want him to have a really large head. Forge and set. And maybe I'll have to bring it down a little bit so it coordinates a little closer with his body. Oh, that might have been a little too far. Where is that? Oh no, I sent it further up. That's what I did. It has to be minus 80. Okay. Oh dear. That is yeah, that's quite the guy. All right. Well, that's just the way it's going to be for now, I think. So yeah, again, you can individually modify all the different components. If I animate him, he'll probably animate somewhat normally. Well, yes, I have to give him an animation. Let's at least treat him a little fairly. 819. Yo, reset. There he goes. Yes. So also, let's say I really like this strange rune man. What I can do is I can save this configuration here so that if I open up this program in the future, if I close my client and open it up later, I can quickly bring him back to the scene. Bring all these features back to the scene, including the modifications that I've made. So let's hit save. And let's enter it as guard.txt. As you can see, I already have a ton of models saved here because I was creating the sailing skill. I wanted a lot of different tools, which I'll show you one of those in a second. So let's just save that. So in the future, if I close and reopen my client and all of this is empty, I can quickly load the guard back up. And it'll come back with everything that I've changed. And if I hit forge and set, it'll bring him right back to the scene where he belongs. Okay, let's also do, let's do a little bit of group transform. So I'm going to add another model just as a reference point. I'm just going to make it a crate again, 7699. Forge and set. So there we have our guard who is in the middle of a crate. Now let's say I want the guard and the crate mashed together, but let's say I don't want them to be in the same space. So let's say I want the guard to move one step forward, so one step in the negative y direction. So I could do that manually, go to each of his different models and modify it. But if I'm a little lazy, I can use group transform. So this number right here is the group that the individual model is currently set to. If I store an NPC, it'll automatically set the group to 8 just for convenience. If I store a player, it'll automatically set the group to 9 just for convenience. So what I can do is, and you'll notice our crate down here, let's just give it a name, crate, is set to the group of 1. So what I can do is I can change the group number that I'm modifying to 8. And then any values that I modify here will be modified for all the objects in that group. So we have two different features here. We have the adjuster, which will adjust all of group 8 by the value I enter, and setter, which sets the value to all the values I enter, or to the value I enter. It'll set all the values of group 8 to the value I enter here. There we go. So let's say I want to adjust all of group 8 by y minus 1. So if I hit this down arrow here, there you go. Now all items, all objects, or all models in group 8 are now modified, pushed in the y minus 1 direction. Things that weren't in group 8, like the crate, has not been. So if I forge and set, there you go. Again, translation is relative to the scale of the object, so I'd have to manually change that to make it work, the big head to make it work with the rest of the model. So for now, maybe let's just delete the helmet. I think that'll make things look just a little more humane. And then you can also set. So let's say I want to set everything to All right, let's say I want to set all the values of group 8 to -10. It won't adjust these values by -10, so it won't be -11. It will be -10 or -50, right? Versus this, if I put in 10, it'll add 10 to the Y values, right? So you can do that for translation by full tile, you can do it for translation by subtile, and you can do it for a scaling factor as well. So let's say I want to, let me just set all the Y values back to 0, just keep things simple. Let's say I want to set everything to scale larger. I want to scale everything by double. So I'm just going to enter 256, that would be double scale, into the setter. For the X, Y, and Z direction, hit forge and set, and there you go. He is now double the size. All of his models except for the crate, because that wasn't being modified, because the crate wasn't in group 8, it was in group 1. Okay, so let's move on to a very complex model that I've created previously for the sailing skill. Let's move to this big boat. As you can see, for clarity, let me just change the name to boat. That'll help things. For clarity, I've also changed the name of the individual models that I have saved in my text files to be what the actual model is. Because when you're dealing with this many models, it can get very confusing very quickly. So if you hit forge and set, there's a couple neat little quirks we're going to have to take note of. So look at how big this model is. First off, you can see my radius isn't set properly because surrounding tiles are actually overlapping with the model. So if I increase it to about 800, it'll overlap properly. You notice that just kind of due to the nature of how RuneLite allows you to spawn these objects, it will overlap. If you keep increasing the radius, it'll overlap with surrounding objects. So that's just a quirk you have to work around when dealing with massive objects like this. Now another thing you'll notice, look at the spire here. As we rotate it, the spire, for whatever reason, is doing this really weird non-Euclidean geometry where it's weirdly overlapping with benches, with the sail. That's because each model has every poly set to a different priority level, which tells it when it's everything in that model will render a certain way. So for example, this spire probably has a really high priority, like, I don't know, let me just guess, a priority of 10, whereas this sail has a priority of 1. Whereas some parts of this boat might have a higher priority than the spire because the spire is not overlapping the base of the boat. This would be really finicky to manually modify. You'd have to know what polygon you're manipulating, and you'd have to know what priority to give it. There is a brute force method, though, that while it solves a lot of these problems, it's a relatively simplistic one. It's not perfect. But what you can do, go back to our model anvil and hit priority. This sets all of the polygons in a single model to the exact same priority, like 1 or 0, whatever it is. And so when I hit forge and set, let me just show you. There you go. Now it's reorganized things so that they're all the same priority. So now what appears first is now just based on the distance to the camera, the distance to you. You'll notice it does have some small quirks. Like these are overlapping. Realistically, the shield should have higher priority than the wall here. But again, you'd have to manually manipulate those polygons, and that is just way too much work for me and for the average user of this plugin. Okay, that is priority, that's forging, that's manipulating all these models. Anything else I wanted to show here? No, I think we're pretty good. The last thing I probably want to show you is the rest of the config menu, because there's a couple smaller features here that can just be handy for especially if you're recording for whatever reason. And that would be our Oculus Orb. As you can see, I've been free floating around for a little while. And that's because I've used Oculus Orb mode, which you can toggle on and off by using page down. So again, page down, it's now locked to my character. Page up, sorry. By default, it's page up. Page up, and it unlocks the camera. You can also change the orb speed, which can be very handy. If I am, say, an orb speed of 4, as you can see, is pretty slow. But if I am moving this boat, let's just add a little path. Oh, it's already got a path. Let's continue that path. Control A. And I'll hit page down to remove the debug menu. I'll do Control Space to get it moving. As you can see, I can get it to move at a fairly cinematic speed. Yeah, for just getting a nice scene. I think his speed of 4 or 5 is walk speed. 5 is walk speed. There you go. Other neat features, let me just reset that. Other neat features is you can auto-rotate. So this probably doesn't have any hotkeys by default because it's a very niche function. But you can hit Alt. I can hit Alt, left or right arrow keys, and it'll rotate the camera at a set speed. I can increase the speed. There you go. And I can set it back to its default. You can also rotate in the vertical speed, in the vertical orientation. Extremely niche. I don't really see it actually being used, but I have that set to Alt up and Alt down. And you can just hit the same buttons again to toggle it off. Okay. Yes, very last thing before I let you go. I showed you how I can store my model. So let's just store that. Let's select me. Put me right here. Yeah, let's reset that radius to 0. A very handy thing that we can do with this is we can use the Fashionscape plugin, or there's a couple other ones. I just really like the Fashionscape plugin. Very handy to change my model. So let's just do Dragon Medhelm. Dragon? Okay, here we go. Good enough. And I can store myself once I'm modified with Fashionscape to get those exact parameters, that exact look on the model that I've just stored. Very handy for making duplicates of yourself, for creating whatever player or NPC you want. And anything else, any other plugins I should probably mention while I'm at it. Entity Hider, very good for setting up your scene as well. Roof removal can be very nice if you want to keep roofs on. Yeah, that's probably about it. So, well, thank you for coming to this tutorial. Thank you for listening all the way through. If you have any questions, just please let me know, and I'll hopefully be able to answer. Thank you and have a great day.